1. Thought I'd tell you all about an incident from a few months ago. Now mind you, in no way do I dress like I work anywhere when I'm off the clock. I'm typically in jeans or shorts, and one of my graphic tees, sci-fi or pagan related, nerdy witch but nothing offensive, and boots. Now I'm also clumsy and can trip over a flat surface. This comes up in the story. So my husband and I went to a local Asian market in our city a few months ago. We wanted to stock up for the second lockdown we figured was coming from the upcoming flu season, and COVID cases have been going up in the area again. We typically enjoy a more East Asian diet than your typical American. Not weeaboos or anything, just find it a healthier diet, more flavorful. And I might love rice way too much. Anyway, this market is a seafood market, a large one, and smells like it again. This comes up. And they have a lot of stuff you'd not typically find in a smaller international store. We're used to being the only white folk in there the majority of the time, but the staff is amazing and super friendly. So hubby and I walk into the market, grab a cart, and we head off to get our supply of rice, noodles, real instant ramen, not the plastic stuff marketed in American grocery stores, and juices. Hubby was looking over the various rice bags, deciding how big we wanted to go for the stocking up. And I told him I'd go to the ramen section and start looking over what they have this month. Stock doesn't stay the same necessarily, and you can find real good ramen sometimes. Anyway, looking over the selection, I grab a ramen that's in a bowl. Great idea if you want less cleanup after a 10-hour shift of doing tech support. And I knock about half a dozen other packages down. Like I said, clumsy. I kneel down to collect the various items on the floor to put back, and stand up to ensure the next person doesn't repeat what I did. And then she shows up. Karen, hair, clothes, shoes, purse, jewelry, sunglasses, and overly offensive perfume. There has to be a class on this take on how to get the uniform right. As she walks up to me, I'd seen her out of the corner of my eye. She grabs me by the arm with her plastic claws and tries to spin me. But being a larger guy, I don't move easy.
Excuse me, but I need help and you're the only American I see working here.
I remove my arm from her grip. Ma'am, I do not work here, I'm just looking over the ramen selection. And I don't know who the fuck you are, but do not put your hands on me if you want to keep them. Mind you, I do not react well to being treated as a punching bag under the best of times. I have a I am so done with people attitude most days, and I have a deep-seating dislike of entitled people. I worked food service and retail for several years, as well as a janitor. Those jobs really show you who people are.
Of course you do. I saw you stocking the shelf. And don't you dare threaten me. I'll have your job.
Ma'am, I knocked these over and was putting them back like a decent human being, and you touched me first. That's assault. I then inquired as to why foul see-you-next-Tuesdays like her always want people's job because they're short-sighted.
How dare you? Where's your manager? I'll have you fired.
Again, you dumb bitch, I do not work here, so you can't have my non-existent job. Now at this stage, my husband turns into the aisle behind her, and he has that look on his face of, I pity whomever set him off. Hey, hon, you alright? Yeah, just dealing with a wild feral Karen.
Mind your business.
And then she utters an anti-gay slur to my husband. Now another man turns into the aisle next to hubby, and by the look on his face, it's her husband. And he's already slumping his shoulders in defeat. Apparently this is a regular thing for the poor guy, and I also hear someone coming up behind me. I turn, and it's an employee I'm acquainted with. She's wonderfully funny, and always has a smile on her face and has a slight accent. Is everything alright? I heard yelling. She then begins hurling racist Asian slurs.
This worker refuses to help me, assaulted me, and threatened my life.
Seriously, there has to be a class at Karen U for lying on your feet. Fuck you, lady. How dare you use that word? And if I wanted to hurt you, you'd already be on the effing floor. Her husband has this defeated look on her face. Must you? Again? Why do you have to do this?
Again?
Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to leave.
Not until you fire this
And then she uttered another anti-gay slur. My husband steps in between me and the racist Karen. He uses that firm, soft tone of his that can make my blood run cold. Now look here, you dumb, entitled, inbred mistake. He does not work here. He then stepped a little closer to her, and I could easily guess the look on his face, because RK looked like she'd seen a ghost. Now leave him alone, or he'll be the least of your worries. And then the Karen U training kicks in again and she slaps my husband. The employee runs off, I'm guessing to get her boss. Hubby didn't flinch or anything. His military training. The fuck? I pull my husband back as racist Karen's husband grabs his wife. That's enough. I told you before, do not ever put your hands on other people. Seriously, how many times has she done that? I'm not really surprised by this when I think back, typical entitled Karen behavior in all honesty. The employee is back with her senior manager behind her. From my understanding, she's part of the owner's family, and is the second or third generation American. What in the world is going on here? Well, dumbass Karen here thought I was an employee, assaulted me and my husband, all while using a racial slur against E. Racist Karen, for her part, is so rad and enraged that she actually can't speak. I'd never realized that was a function of a Karen. I thought they always had words for any situation. I'm so sorry for this. She's off her meds, says her husband. Obviously, she needs a higher dosage. We'll just leave. No, you will not, says the store manager. No, you will not. Not if she physically assaulted 2 customers as well as used hate speech against an employee. Racist Karen finds her voice. Unfortunately, that voice was filled with more racial slurs. Followed by, no wonder this place smells so foul. You people can't even clean properly. And then she turns to us, and we get our share. Now, racist Karen had gotten out of her husband's hold, pulled out her phone, and does the most Karen thing you can think of. She calls the police and lies about an assault on her. Fine, let's play your game. The manager turns to E. Please go meet the officers at the door and bring them here. E leaves and comes back about 5 minutes later with 2 officers in tow. Not surprising they're that fast in responding, there's usually a patrol car in the lot clocking speedsters going down the street. Now, the officers don't even get a word in at all as racist Karen goes into white woman Karen fake crying about how she was assaulted by me, by my husband, and the employees, all the while using homophobic and racial slurs. The officers don't look too happy, but also unbothered by the show. I admit this surprised me. Racist Karen husband, again. Yeah, sorry. Abby and I look at each other in surprise. Officer, she physically assaulted myself, my husband, and used hate speech against the store manager and employee. Also, what do you mean again? She's a known problem child, says Cop 2. And why is she allowed to run free like a feral jackal? She tries to speak, but Cop 1 puts his hand up and silences her. Doesn't work. She goes on about how she's the victim in all this. Typical. Would you like to press charges? Myself, my husband, and the store manager all say yes. Her husband takes her cell phone and purse just as Cop 2 gives her some beautiful new silver bracelets. And she loses what she has left of the sanity she had, and tries to use the back of her head to hit an officer in the face. Cop 2 backed away in reaction, and Cop 2 pulls out his taser and puts her down. Her husband puts her phone in her purse, hands it to Cop 1, pulls out his phone and looks down at her as Cop 2 is getting her up. That's it, I'm done. I'm calling our lawyer for a divorce. I can't deal with this anymore. I'm unsure what language she was trying to speak as she got back on her feet, and Cop 1 and Cop 2 escorted her out. Her husband followed, looking embarrassed as can be, and finally having his shoulders squared and confident. The store manager apologized, and asked if she could give us a discount on our groceries, and we declined. We honestly were more worried about SM and E being verbally assaulted, instead of what we'd had said and done to us. We're those kind of people. They both said they were fine, and E walked with us for a few minutes, and we chatted, while store manager went to speak to the cops. Now fast forward to our recent court date. Store manager and E decided to drop the hate speech charges, but racist Karen is banned for life from their store, as well as about a dozen others. Apparently the community doesn't want her around causing trouble. She pled guilty, but isn't serving jail time. She has to go to court-ordered anger management therapy and is on parole for the next 4 years. The judge apparently wasn't having any of her fake tears. She saw through it all, and I was living for it. She was told that if she misses just one appointment for anger management and/or therapy, or her parole officer reports she isn't taking her meds, her parole will be jail time. We were also rewarded damages that she had to pay, or again jail time. Her husband was there, seemed years younger since we'd seen him. They're divorced, he has the kids, and she has to have supervised visitations. He apologized to us for her, saying he was just embarrassed about it all, but happy with how it turned out. He had a wicked smile when he said she deserved every bit of what she got. And to anyone who's about to make excuses for her by saying she was obviously mentally ill, I and my husband both have mental issues. His from his time in the military, mine from abuse, home, school, employment. I'm medicated and in therapy. He isn't, but has assistance from the VA in terms of disability. He's hesitant about therapy, as he's never had a positive experience with therapists, and he said that he's on more than enough meds as it is. We held back as much as we did because we both recognized that she has mental health issues. We know that sometimes the demons win. I do have empathy for her, but not in the situation she created. Also, with my own mental health, I'm highly OCD. I tend to recall every detail in situations like this when I become hypervigilant with my attention. I can still recall her clothes and the clothes of my husband. Of her husband, the store manager, and E, I have issues editing my own stories, even in real life, so they tend to get long. I did edit this, but it felt it was as short as I could get it, or as short as my OCD would allow. And being from the city, I'm in the Midwest. Please note that people here tend to overachieve at the roles they live. When you commit to an identity, you commit without limits. This city is also committed to holding on at all costs to its segregation, redlining, and defining you by the neighborhood you grew up in, the high school you went to, and where you currently live. If you decide not to live by these rules, you're an outcast and seen as a non-local. I've lost family and friends by both my choices of diet and educating myself on other cultures and communities. But hey, small city, cheap cost of living, and love to have found a community of misfits that are now my family. Two. The morning after a good rowdy kickback in our apartment, my roommate and I go to the orange hardware store after noticing some holes in the walls. Roommate goes to find plaster and I go to find paint. I get to the paint department and I'm looking through the paint swatches to remember what our walls look like. Keep in mind, still very hungover. I pick out a color that is probably the closest, and if not, then I'll just mix my own paint. Art minor. There's no employee at the paint mixing station, so I just put the swatch in my hoodie. To pass the time, I sort the paint swatches properly because mild OCD. Then it comes.
Ahem. I need you to do your damn job and mix me some paint.
I stare blankly as the hangover is blocking my ability to respond.
Hello? I'm talking to you, mix my fucking paint.
Fortunately, my brain finally decides to turn on again. I don't work here.
Don't fucking lie to me. I saw you sorting the colour wall properly. Only a lazy employee would do that sort of shit.
Ma'am, I'm gonna be honest, I'm really hungover, and your screeching is making me want to puke. That statement went as well as you would expect.
You fucking terrible worker, and terrible person for saying that. I'm gonna get your manager and have you fired.
Storms off stage left. Once the banshee left, I hear chuckling coming from down the aisle behind me. Lo and behold, my roommate listened to most of it and is laughing his ass off. He asked if I got the paint, and I explained the first part of the confrontation. We decided to wait for the manager because maybe he'll mix our paint before we're kicked out. We wait a few more minutes and George walks up. oblivious to what transpired, and starts mixing our paint. Enter stage left, Karen with a very annoyed manager on her heels.
That's the one that called me an orangutan whore, and he needs to be fired right now.
Pointing at me. Georgia, I'm frankly surprised you'd say such a nasty thing.
What now? Not him, the scrawny one in the hoodie. He even told me he's drunk.
Jason, the manager, looks at me confused. Ma'am, he doesn't work here, but I can ask him to leave for insulting you.
No, he definitely works here. I saw him working.
Okay, then I quit.
You can't quit. I want you fired.
By now our paint is done mixing, and I ask George if he'd like to escort us to the front. I've never seen a morning shift employee brighten up so fast. Karen is belligerent, and the manager tries to calm her down with coupons. My roommate, George, and I leave paint as fast as possible and can still hear the screeching from the cashier stand. We pay, and George walks us to the car. I explained what really happened, and he laughs and says he'll tell Jason the situation. Initially, my roommate and I were going to go straight home, but we had to see the outcome of this, so George agreed he'd come back out once the orangutan whore was gone. The police ended up having to be called just to escort her out, but she was not arrested. Jason and George come out to the car, and as George had already explained what happened, Jason profusely apologized. We laughed it off, and I said something along the lines of, "It was worth getting out of bed despite the hangover." Jason gave us free membership perks for the next time we came in. We were also kindly informed that Karen came back later that day and vandalized some of the yard equipment always on display, and she was arrested. Serves the orangutan whore right. 3. This was years ago when I spent months working in a charity shop and was surprised at many unscrupulous things that people try to do. But this guy stands out for what kind of moron do you take me for audacity, so I still think of him sometimes. I'm writing the gist of the conversation because I don't remember every word that was said. For context, in this shop, we were fortunate to be in a high-income area, so we were never short of clothing donations and most of it good quality. This meant we didn't put any clothes on the shop floor in anything less than pristine condition, and nothing from super cheap brands, because we didn't have to. There were also several stages a piece of clothing goes through before it makes it onto the rail, so multiple people have checked it for defects. We then check everything again when we go through the clothes to rotate stuff out, so there's a lot of quality control. Anyway, one day I'm working in the shop by myself, and a gentleman walks in. Mr. Character. He's carrying one of our shopping bags and heading for the counter, so I hop behind it. Good morning. I bought this here the other day, and I'd like a refund, please. He reaches in his pocket and takes out a receipt and one of our price tags, which he places on the counter. I recognize my own handwriting on the tag. It's for a men's t-shirt and priced almost at the highest I would try to sell a t-shirt for. So I'm expecting to recognize this shirt, since I dither a lot before I put a price that high on anything. Pulling off the tag is a bit sus, but I'm giving him the benefit of the doubt at this point. But then the smell of stale cigarette smoke invades my nose as he reaches into his bag, pulls out what looks like an old grey dishcloth, and drops it onto my counter. Tentatively, I unfurl this thing and note that it is in fact a t-shirt. He at least got that right. But the kind of t-shirt that you dread finding in a bag of donated clothes. This stinky rag definitely did not come from my shop. It had everything wrong with it. Years of fading and old stains, and the lower half was covered in little holes I suspect were caused by hot rocks. Those burning pieces of hash that fall off of a joint and burn holes in everything. It's also from a brand that would have only cost a couple of quid to begin with, so we wouldn't bother trying to sell it, especially not for the price on that tag. I'm sorry, not really, I'm insulted. I don't believe this came from our shop, so I'm not going to be able to give you a refund. In retrospect, I probably could have just been like, no tag, no refund. But I wanted him to know that I knew what he was trying to pull. He says, sporting a feigned Pikachu face, "What? Why? We wouldn't sell clothes in this condition, and why would you buy it?" "Are you the manager?" No, but I am the only one here who can give refunds today. Who is your manager? When will the manager be here? And other questions of this type, but he's not acting anything like you'd expect from a disgruntled customer. He doesn't seem sure of himself at all. She'll be here tomorrow, so you're welcome to come back and ask her then. Well, okay then. Puts his stuff back in the bag and leaves. I pull the air freshener out from under the counter to clear the smell and get back to whatever I was doing. I told the manager when she was back at work, and she was like, "Point him out to me if he comes back." But as far as I know, he never did. 4. I cut hair in a busy salon where all we do are haircuts. Today was a busy day, and sadly my manager wasn't working, so I was the one in charge. While cutting hair, I noticed a group come in. There were kids with a mom, and they all had no masks. In my state, we all require masks unless a medical condition. I thought, whatever. I did a kid's cut, and my other coworker did the other boy. We finish, and everything is good. We get to the front desk, and I see the Russian mom wants to pay for the haircut separately. My coworker already processed one cut with the mom's single-use coupon. I get to checking mine out, however I notice she wants to use the same single-use coupon. I'm skeptical, but I try to use it anyway so she won't think I didn't at least try. I scan it and the computer rejects it. "I'm sorry, you can't use this coupon twice because it's a single-use coupon," I say. She looks annoyed and says, "I don't understand. You can't use it twice because it's only for one haircut." "Why do you guys make it more difficult than it has to be?" I ignored her question. She's frustrated and says, "Well then, I want to use the coupon for the other haircut since it's cheaper because it's a kid's cut and I'll save more." I can't do that because the coupon was already used. I can't go back and fix it once it's been scanned. She gets even more pissed because I had to give her a full price haircut. "Well, now I can't tip you." I honestly didn't care. I just wanted her to pay and leave since I was so busy. That's okay. I understand. She pays and complains to her husband about how I overcharged. I didn't. The invoices were switched. My coworker had a kid's cut and I had the normal price. However, she paid the same. She kept complaining and she wouldn't leave after paying. "You overcharged me and you can't do anything about it if it's already been done." She was standing by the door complaining and arguing back. I said, "Well, I guess there's nothing to talk about," snapping back. I just wanted to go back to work. I couldn't believe we'd been going back and forth that long. "Excuse me, what's your name?" I ignored her till I responded back with a fake name, Jessica. She finally left. But that was the worst experience I've had with a customer that wasn't even my fault. She got what she asked for and was just angry she couldn't use a single-use coupon twice. 5. I've worked in customer service jobs since I graduated high school nearly 15 years ago. Because of this, it shouldn't be surprising that I have a lot of stories. This particular story happened during the few years I worked at good old Walmart. It happened probably a decade ago at this point, but I still remember it vividly as it was like nothing that had ever happened before, and nothing quite like it has happened since. Just to set things up, here is a quick rundown of the characters of this story. There's me, a quiet girl in my mid-20s at the time. I like computers and video games, and I just happened to be lucky enough to apply for the electronics department, where they had an opening. I had a few coworkers in the department with me, but the only one that really features in this story was an older gentleman I'll call Leroy. He was maybe in his mid-50s or so. We got along quite well, which was good, considering we were often paired together for the closing shifts. We'll also be seeing a woman, Regina. She was an overnight manager at the time, so not my direct manager. We just crossed paths a lot since the overnighters came in shortly before closing. Then, of course, we come to the main character. I did at some point learn his name, but seeing how I'm bad with names anyway, I couldn't tell you his real name, even if I wanted to. I'll call him Bernie. He is older, probably mid-50s to early 60s. I don't want to say this without sounding like a snob, but he always came across as being kind of scruffy looking. Thin hair, but had a bushy grey beard and rough-looking clothes. I remember he had bad breath, and I would try to stand back from him when I saw him. Minor characters are Bernie's family. He always came in with his son, his daughter-in-law, and a couple of their children. Last important piece is Bernie's sister, who also happened to be employed at Walmart and worked on the overnight crew under Regina. This Walmart is in a small town, so it was easy for coincidences like that to happen. This Walmart was the biggest store in town and the only real place to get electronics or clothing without having to travel. I had encountered Bernie and his family in passing several times before I actually had to interact with him. I had sold them movies and candy a few times. These meetings were brief and polite. Nothing really to take note of, but I soon started recognizing their faces when they would come in. Small town meant a lot of regulars, so this was normal. Then, one evening, I see Bernie looking over the wall of televisions. I left him alone at first, but after he had been there a few minutes, I went up to see if he needed anything. He accepted my help and proceeded to ask me about our televisions. He asks about the different types and brands. What did these specs on the details mean? He even asked more specific things like what brand did I prefer and what kinds did we see the most returns on. We live in a rural area where the customers seem to want big screens for not a lot of money. Even if the television isn't any good, as long as it's big and cheap, people would buy it. I would often try to steer people away from the ones I had heard complaints about, or the ones I saw come back to us the most often. Despite my answers, Bernie seemed to focus in on a 50-inch television that I had heard less than stellar things about, but whatever. If a customer asks for my advice and doesn't take it, that's on them. It didn't bother me. After we had been discussing the different televisions for a while, I mentioned how the picture quality not only depends on the TV but the source as well. You can't watch a standard definition DV on a high-def TV and expect it to be a high-def movie. This urged him to start looking into a new Blu-ray player. We move over to those displays and start to once again go over the specifications and brands. When it comes to the player, he seems more annoyed how the known brands were so much higher. He once again asks for my opinion on brands and features. I offhandedly mention how I didn't bother with a Blu-ray player, because I had my PlayStation 3 to play my Blu-rays instead. He became intrigued at how one system could have multiple functions of playing movies and games, and so we headed over to look at the game stations. This was in the days of the war between the PS3, Wii, and Xbox 360. Now remember that the whole reason we were looking at the game system was so he could have a system to play Blu-rays. The 360 and the Wii did not do this. Regardless, I still had to once again go through each system and describe the features and differences between them. Bernie did not seem completely dense. I don't think he was tech illiterate or anything, but during all these discussions I frequently had to repeat information. He would ask the same question a few times. He did much better with the TV and Blu-ray players, but the game system seemed to go completely over his head. I kept pointing out if the only reason he was looking at a game system was so that it could do games and Blu-ray, the PS3 was the only option. He kept saying something like, "Oh yeah," before asking another question about the PS3. Then his attention would wander to the other systems, and we'd go over them before I would remind him yet again that it was a good system but did not play Blu-rays. Our tour ended with him looking at the HDMI cables. He wanted to make sure he was getting the best possible picture for the best possible price, and so the HDMI was obviously the best choice. Even so, I still had to go over composite and component cables with him, and what the differences meant for his picture quality. By this point, he seemed to have positively decided on the television he wanted, the PS3, and HDMI cables. But seeing how it was a large purchase, he said he wanted to think about it. His son and his family soon found him, and they left together without buying anything from me that day. I know this seems like a long explanation with nothing happening, but there's a point to this. The fact that he left without buying anything wasn't unusual. A lot of our shoppers would want to do their research before their purchase, and after asking their questions, they would leave with nothing. Sometimes they would return to make the purchase later, and sometimes they wouldn't. What was unusual about this encounter was the length of time I spent with him. It was a good hour of my shift answering questions about all the products he was interested in. My explanation was a watered-down version of everything I went through with him. So what, you may be asking? I got paid hourly. I didn't get paid commissions for sales, and so I honestly did not care if someone bought something from me or not. What difference did this make? Well, you see, this was only Bernie's first visit to study our television selection. Over the course of the next several weeks, Bernie came back to the electronics section multiple times. On each visit, he would start at the televisions and ask about them. Around 90% of the questions he would ask would be the same ones I had already discussed with him. I would even sometimes mention how we had discussed that last time, and he would dismiss this as if it was normal to go over again. The visits always started with the televisions, move over to the Blu-ray players and/or game systems, and end at the cable section. Each time was another 45 minutes to an hour going in circles over the same information. I mean, maybe he was a super prudent shopper and wanted to make sure he got the same information each time. Maybe he had nothing else to do. I honestly do not know what the issue was that caused him to come into the department on several occasions to discuss the same things over and over again. As mentioned, I usually had the closing shift and never worked mornings. I don't know if Bernie ever came in and did this with the other electronics associates, but I know I went through this cycle 3 times, and co-worker Leroy went through it with him at least twice. We were both frustrated at the time, spent going over everything with him so many times, and spending so much time away from our other duties. I couldn't say how much each visit went with Leroy for sure, but each time I took him through everything, he always came back to the same products he said he'd likely purchase. On his 4th visit with me, that had lasted another hour, I had given up all hope that he would ever buy anything, so when he started asking me to start getting everything pulled out for him, I was shocked. He was finally going to buy his stuff, and I wouldn't have to deal with it ever again. Ah! Like, this story has such a simple ending. In retrospect, what happened was a little odd, but at the time I didn't think much of it. I was probably so giddy that this was happening that I ignored any red flags. When he first started his purchase, he asked for only the television. We got it on a flat cart for him, and started taking it to the register. Seeing how Bernie always came in during the evening and spent so much time with us, the overnight associates started to filter in. One of the overnight managers, Regina, started her shift at the same time and was making her way past us. When she saw the transaction happening, she started hovering around my counter. I thought at the time she was probably waiting to see if she was going to have to call for someone to help him take his TV out to his car. I think now that it's entirely possible that she had run-ins with Bernie before. I just wouldn't have any way of confirming this. Bernie paid for his television, paid in cash, so there was no issue with it. But before we could call for someone to walk him out, he then acted like he remembered he had wanted to buy the PS3 at the same time. Okay, another transaction. Sure, no problem. We're still happy to get this ordeal over with. Whenever Leroy and I see each other, we're smiling with our victory. Leroy is so excited he even volunteers to go get his jacket, so we don't have to wait on a cart pusher to help Bernie to his car. I get the PS3 out of the case and ring it up. Once again, paid without an issue. Oh, but wait. Those cables I kept reminding him about. He better get those too. Fine, another transaction. I'd prefer we just get everything over and done with at once, but okay. A little annoying, but no more so than having to deal with him over all this time. We get the cable and go ring it up. At this point, Bernie's son comes by. I think his daughter-in-law is wandering around with the kids in the background, but they don't really do anything here. Bernie's son sees the purchases Bernie is making and seems happy with it, until we come to the PS3. Bernie and I explain how it's to play games and movies. The son seems confused.
You need the other remote to play movies, he declares.
What? No, you don't. He leaves briefly and returns with the, might I point out, totally optional Blu-ray remote for the PS3. He flat out tells Bernie that you have to have this remote to play movies on the PS3. I try to tell Bernie that it isn't required, but does make it easier if he wants it. Apparently his son is the expert now, as Bernie takes his word over mine. He asks for the price since he has to get it now too. I tell him the price, which I think was right around $24. Bernie then asks,
Well, since I'm getting all this other stuff, can I have this for free?
I'm thrown off. This was the first, but granted not the last time someone had tried to haggle price with me. I get that people haggle when it comes to private sales or places like flea markets. To this day, though, I don't understand the people that try to haggle with a department store like Walmart. Maybe they are more willing to do that kind of thing in other locations, certainly not this Walmart. I tell him that I can't do that, and if he wants a remote, he'll have to pay for it. Regina even chimes in that she's a manager and would not let me give it to him. She is being blunt, firm. She has no reason to budge on this. Fate would have it that at this moment, Bernie's sister walks on by on the way to her shift. I don't know what kind of a relationship Bernie had with his sister, but they didn't greet each other. She didn't say a word during this whole thing. When Bernie sees her, he asks if she can use her employee discount to buy the items, and thereby get the remote for free. His sister has walked up on the situation with basically no context. She only stops there after being somewhat dragged into what was going on. Bernie's math was right. If his sister were buying everything he was, the amount she would have gotten off would have been more than enough to pay for what the remote cost. However, store policy was you only use your store employee discount for your immediate household. It was meant for you, your spouse, and your children. If you had them. They seemed to be okay with you buying things for your parents, but only if you lived with them. This seemed hazy when it came to siblings, but the consensus between managers seemed to be no, it doesn't qualify. Whatever Regina knew of Bernie's relationship with his sister, she only gave the sister a quick glance before looking back at Bernie. If she used it for you, I'd have to fire her, she announced. It was Bernie's turn to be thrown off. He briefly became quiet. He points out to Regina that this was his sister. Regina insists that this doesn't matter as it's against policy. Up until this point, Bernie had always been kind of cheerful. But suddenly he flips a switch and goes from friendly to irrationally angry. He snaps at Regina for threatening to fire his sister. He goes off on how she can't do that for using a discount. The way he's talking, it's like he thinks his sister is seriously about to use her job, even though everything was purely hypothetical at best. I'm once again taken aback. Regina wasn't actually saying she was going to fire the sister, she was just telling him it was against the policy. He wasn't going to be able to get any amount off his purchase for any reason. It just happened that this particular method he was trying to exploit for savings had other consequences. His sister, who clearly knew her job was not actually in danger, just heads toward the back to clock in for her shift. She never commented on what happened, so I don't know what she thought about it. Bernie is still going on about how long his sister has worked for the company, and how he can't believe they were about to fire her over this, even though they weren't. Leroy starts coming back to the register and seems confused about what's going on. Bernie says that if he can't get the remote for free and if the store is about to fire his sister, he doesn't want any of it anymore. Regina just calmly responds that he's free to take it up to the customer service and return the items if he wants. He agrees this is for the best, and Leroy helps take the items up to customer service instead of out to Bernie's car. Regina leaves to go check on the overnighters. I'm left alone in the department trying to absorb what just happened. Leroy missed out on most of it, so when he comes back with the TV and no Bernie, he looks at me and gives me an exasperated, "What happened?" I'm still processing, and I tell him to put the television away in the back, and I'll tell him when he gets back. We spend what remains of our shift discussing the whole mess and venting our shared frustrations. Apparently, the whole time customer service was processing his return, he was snapping at them too about how badly he and his family are being treated. I still have no idea what to think about all of it. I have my theories, but that's all they are. Maybe he realized how much he was spending and didn't want to admit it, so he blamed it on us. Perhaps he really is that easily provoked when it came to his family. What wasn't a real possibility to me might have sounded serious to him. Apparently the threat of his sister losing her job wasn't enough for Bernie to boycott Walmart. A couple nights later, he's right back in the store. He stops me and calmly tells me how I did nothing wrong and how it was all that manager's fault for threatening his sister like that. I just nod and tell him it's fine, even though I'm secretly thinking how crazy he must be. He doesn't even seem against spending money in our store, as he tells me how he'll soon return to buy everything all over again. He just wants to make sure that manager isn't there. Internally, I am screaming, "No!" He never made good on his promise, though. Fortunately enough, I didn't even have to go through the information dump again. Some weeks after all this went down, Bernie returned to the store. He stops to chat with me again and tells me how he and his family are moving away. I can't remember the reasons he gave, but he and his son's family were going to be moving across the country. That seemed to be true, as that was the last time I encountered Bernie. I sometimes think back on this event and get frustrated at all the time I wasted. All Bernie's son had to do was keep his mouth shut, and everything would have been fine. If Bernie had gotten his TV, at least I could have thought about how all my effort was worth it if he got a product he was happy with. Instead, we both got absolutely nothing, and to boot, it was all over a remote he did not need. Still, since he ended up leaving the store forever, I guess that somewhat gives me a happy ending. I was right at home there, and was considered one of the more knowledgeable of the department. At the same time, though, I was known for being a little lazy and rarely on time for work. It's a good thing I knew more about the products than my co-workers, and was well liked by management, or I may not have been kept around as long as I had been. I'm tall, straight brown hair, and due to said laziness, I was overweight. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to Adventures in Fast Food and Retail, number 113. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use and sent in stories for use in this video. Okay. You know, that story number, was it story number 4? No, it wasn't. It was story number 3, the one with the t-shirt. That reminds me of the days I used to volunteer at a charity shop. We got some, well, I've spoken before about the smelly customers. You know, the polite but smelly customers. This video's going to be quite long, actually. But we also used to get some kind of crummy people. You know, the people who would, the ones who would blatantly steal from a charity shop? Then you also had the dodgy people who would swap prices on things. They try, you know, to get something cheaper. I guess in their minds they thought, since it was a charity shop, that we should be grateful for it or something. Or they thought that, well, if they pay something for it, that doesn't count as stealing. It totally counts as stealing if you swap the price for something cheaper. In fact, that counts in any store. Even when I worked in like a regular retail store, you know, the convenience store I used to work in, there was a customer we actually had to bar for doing just that. He'd come into the reduced section. He'd swap the prices over for the more expensive reduced items, already reduced, but for the cheaper items, so he got them cheaper. And he ruined what was quite a good thing, because he always made out quite well on those, even if he wasn't futzing around with the prices. There were generally some decent discounts. And instead of accepting the decent offers that were there, he had to ruin it for himself. So he got barred. I'm not sure if he was ever let back in. People, some are great, some not so much. Okay, with that, I'm going to head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.